We talked about, I'm going to just quick review, Roman number 1, what is morality? Morality, remember, and this is what we call in the biz meta-ethics, talking about what is morality, how do we use the vocabulary terms. It's an abstract concept for sure. Meta-ethics is the big picture. We reflected on that. What is morality? I gave 4 major features of that. Do you remember that last week? Supremely authoritative, prescriptive, universalizable, and makes reference to human dignity, welfare, and flourishing. Those are the 4 major features of something as a moral value or duty. I emphasize that is descriptive is a fact about reality, but morality is not about descriptions or facts. It's about prescriptions or oughts or shoulds. And that's important, a very important understanding that an ought statement says what you ought to do. It's a prescription. So when we say rape is wrong, it's what we ought to do. It's ought not to do. Don't do that, Julie. Don't ever rape. That's what we should do. That's the point of the study today. Anyway, so rape is wrong doesn't mean it's just a fact about rape, like this is hard, the substance of this stand is hard, but rather I'm saying rape is wrong means you should not do it. And so, let me say one quick word about that. This week I was chatting with Jennifer, and we mentioned some about the should and ought language. And I want to make sure I make a distinction here for those of you who know some counseling background. In moral categories, when we say the word ought or should not, ought not, completely appropriate, as I've just said, and last week a bunch. We should say things like should and ought for moral cases, right? But we can also say ought and should for things that are not moral. Like I just said, we should say it for that reason. That's not a moral thing, it's a logical thing. If you want to be on time, you should leave early. But that's not a moral thing. It's not a sin if you're late, as it were. But it's a sense of you ought to logically, all right, if you know, make it in life, work hard, that kind of stuff. And then that's true, that's a moral category. When it comes to personal counseling, I'll move on quickly here, but when it comes to our personal health, it is very common for us to have for people who struggle with shame, that is a feeling that they're not good enough. People who struggle with shame struggle with irrational beliefs. And a very common trait amongst people who struggle with shame is they say should and shouldn't to themselves all the time. And they treat them like moral categories. So, I know, my room should be clean every second. I know, I'm failing as a mom. I know I should be around her every 24 hours, 7 days. I know, I ought to, I should. And they do this over and over and over. When you do that, you are not using those terms correctly. You're just beating yourself up for no good reason, and that induces guilt, which increases shame. The feeling of I'm bad, I'm not worthless, I'm not good. So in a counseling situation, I oftentimes encourage people, stop saying that all the time to yourself. They might go, well, David, you say should, right, when it's moral categories. I should pick up my cross and follow Jesus. I should not murder. Those are true. That's not what you're doing. What you're doing is thinking every single thing in life you're failing at and putting a should word to it to induce guilt. And whenever we feel guilt for something that we shouldn't feel guilt for, we call that false guilt. It's just false guilt. That's not true guilt. And I do this in counseling. I'll say, if I went to a court of law and you were prosecuting yourself, and you're going for the judge and jury and saying, and here's my evidence that I'm worthless. I don't work 24/7 and take care of my child 24/7, and I don't think perfect, pure thoughts every second, and I know I failed, whatever. Say, well, you failed miserably. You didn't convince me. That doesn't mean you're worthless. Stop saying should all the time, and I ought to in those categories. Does that make sense what I'm saying? You should have been on time. Yeah, you should have. You ought to feel very guilty, right? No. So people who struggle with low self-esteem, you need to stop saying should all the time. Unless it's true, like I should not murder. That's true. I should deny my will and pick up my cross. Yep, that's true. Okay. So in moral prescriptions, we can say ought and should all day long. Fantastic. Okay. That's prescriptive. Letter C, we talked the difference between realism versus subjectivism, sometimes called objectivism versus relativism, whatever, how you want to do it, that's fine. And here we're asking the question, to what do moral values refer? To what do moral values refer? And in a nutshell, Sound like a nutshell? In moral realism, moral values refer to abstract, objective properties. Abstract, objective properties. They are objective. They're abstract because they're not concrete. They don't have physical properties. They're abstract. They're objective in that it doesn't matter what you feel and think about it. Like saying, if I'm blind, I can't see this stand. It still exists. It doesn't matter if you see it, feel. It doesn't matter what you think and feel about the objective moral property, that value, that moral value. It still is real. It's objective. It's abstract, objective, and it's a property of what I ought to do. And so a moral realist would say, and the reason why it exists out there objectively, independent of humans, is because either there's like floating abstract properties, you might say. They're not really floating, but that's called Platonism. The other view is that those moral abstract properties are stuck inside of an absolute authority we'll call God. That's what a realist is. So realist is that moral values are real things, objective abstract properties that really do exist, which means, to epistemology, it means you can be wrong or right. You're wrong or right. If you think raping is good, you're wrong, because we're appealing to something outside of us. Just as much if you said 2 + 2 = 5, you are wrong, because out there are abstract properties we call mathematical truths. And all humans, even if you're bad at math, even if you have dyscalculia and you can't even figure out arithmetic, I won't say permutations, but abstract problems, you can't do math. They still exist. 2 + 2 still = 4, regardless of your personal opinion. I hate math. Doesn't matter. I love math. Doesn't matter. They're still true. Math, and a realist, moral realist would say the same thing about objective moral values and duties. They're just as real. They're out there and they're real, and it means they're true or false. If you think raping is good, you're just wrong. A subjectivist is the exact opposite. Subjectivist says, to what do moral values refer? Not to things out there. They refer to things in here, in me, my own personal feelings or preferences. So they're not out there, they're in here. So they refer to my own perceptions, my feelings, my beliefs. And so they think that where moral values and duties come from are cultural. People just decide together over time. Their own feelings and predilections and preferences come to fore, and we start doing that. So a realist and a subjectivist are very different answers to the question, to what do moral values refer? And I said last week that I'm very much a moral realist. I think they really do exist, just like mathematical truths. They are abstract properties. And then moral values versus social etiquette versus law. We talked about how the major distinction there, I'm saying, is that some things are simply not moral whatsoever. Some things are moral. And when we talk about etiquette, we're typically to how we treat people and how we can express moral values and duties differently. I gave the analogy I always do: Asians bow down to show honor and respect. In America, typically we shake hands, or depending on your culture and whatever, but we do things to show honor. Most people get that confused and think different expressions of moral values and duties means it's just random. Every culture is radically different. They're not radically different. They're changing how they express it. And then I said, how do we learn what is good? Really 2 ways. You're taught them, or you discover them, or you apprehend them. Like, now I realize that's not good. Just like mathematics. You're either taught math or you apprehend it. So pure mathematicians, they call them, who sit around and think of math problems all day long. Anyway, God bless them. We need them. We need them. I don't, but people and humans need them. This is the same thing with morality. People over the centuries have said, we realize this is moral. All right, that's a quick review in about 5 or 6 minutes. Any question or comments about any of that before we move on? Good question. So if a culture decides what they think is right or wrong, it's not really right or wrong or good and bad. It's supposed to come from, they accept it, but you're saying, but does it really come from God and the 10 Commandments? Is that what I hear you saying? Do you respect and accept what the culture decides, or a higher morality? And that totally depends on whether you're a realist or a subjectivist. And then the second question is, or the issue is, which we'll talk about in this study, of course, is then it also depends on which form of prescriptive ethics you adopt. There are three major forms of prescriptive ethics, and Christians disagree on those three, but we're going to cover those. Absolutely, we'll cover those. And then the issue is, it depends. For example, you brought up the Ten Commandments. You said, isn't that the higher form? Which I remember you did last time too. So in my view, well, okay, first off, that's called deontology, which we'll talk about what that means. So for you, you might lean towards rules, Ten Commandments. That is a way to do it. That is a way to do it. And we'll talk about that. Good question. So people who are subjectivists say, nope, culture is it. There is no higher authority. Why? Because they would say moral values just refer to our own instincts and feelings and preferences. There's nothing higher. There's nothing out there. There's nothing objective about moral values. There is no higher authority. We decide that. You decide the future. Culture is what you make it. That's exactly what they're going to say. A moral realist would say, I fundamentally disagree with you. I think moral values don't refer to how I feel. I think they refer to abstract properties that really do exist. They're part of reality, regardless of what you feel or think, like mathematical truths. And they're going to say, no, it's very different. And that's so the debate goes. I'm going to say, I don't think it's different. But so it does depend. A subjectivist is going to say the first part is true of what you said, but not the second, that there is no outside authority. Which is why I said last week they're so big on finding their tribe. Right? You got to shape your community. You got to make sure your culture, your community does it the way you want. You have to beat the streets and kick out everybody who disagrees with you. Because here in our community, this is how we do it. Whether we hate the police or hate black people, white people, liberals, leftists, whatever it is, that's our community. Try this the way we do it. Go over so-and-so. Get out. If you're subjectivist, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. If you're because then it's issue who's in power. That's what Karl Marx said. Whoever's in power controls it. So for them, it's all about power, not objective moral values and truth. It is a very particular worldview. There's no doubt about it. Most people, 99% of the people have no idea that's what they believe in. I'm not being mean, but from scholarship, we know exactly what they're doing. It's not some big confusing thing. There's two camps. Good question. Anything else to go on? So how do we learn? Okay, so now, Roman number 3. Do you have that in your handout, hopefully? Yeah, good. It says, how do we apprehend morality? Okay, well then how does our radar pick up on it? Or whatever, that's Morse code. But how do we pick up on radar morality? How do we do that? Well, the answer is some people simply deny it. Some people just deny it altogether. They say you can't apprehend morality. And we call that moral skepticism. So an adjective, moral skeptics. Moral skepticism, there are different kinds of moral skepticism, but this is the position that we don't or perhaps even can't have moral knowledge at all. This could be because moral truths don't exist, or because our methods of knowing are unreliable in the moral domain. That is, they might exist, but we wouldn't know it. It's kind of like agnosticism. God might exist, but no one would know. Who knows? And there are different kinds of moral skeptics. There are multiple kinds. And I didn't want to get bogged down here because I didn't want to. I didn't think it mattered that much. Probably the most extreme version of a moral skeptic is what we call a moral nihilist. Be part of moral nihilism. And that's the philosophical view that nothing is morally right or wrong. Nothing at all. Moral nihilists believe that moral claims are neither true nor false because there are no moral facts. They don't exist. And so that's a moral nihilist. Moral nihilists can be extremely dangerous, right? They can be. They're the ones like nothing matters. They love the Metallica song, Nothing Else Matters. You don't know that, you're Christians, but go ahead. Would psychopaths be moral nihilists? They can be, but it is not a necessary corollary of psychopathy to be a moral nihilist. It is not a necessary corollary. They can be, but that's a philosophical view, not a mental issue, if that makes sense. A good question, but they're not the exact same. Psychopaths typically act as if, but they can also be because they have antisocial disorder typically, so they might just think I'm superior than you. Like I know you don't want me to do it in my culture, but doesn't mean I don't think there's no such thing as right and wrong. It just means I think your version of right and wrong is dumb, pathetic, because I'm superior. And Master and slave morality.
Yeah, like Friedrich Nietzsche, master slave morality.
Like Nietzsche. So what about it?
The master morality is kind of nihilistic, and then slave morality is good people.
Okay, so maybe the master is nihilistic. Maybe. I don't remember what Nietzsche said about that. Maybe after we can maybe talk about that part. But there are the people who are moral skeptics. I don't know of any moral skeptic in my life as Christian thinker. That's why I didn't spend much time here. But they're out there, and there are people who say again, either we don't know, we can't. They might be there, but we can't. Our radar doesn't pick them up. Our moral radar, as it were, or we don't have a moral radar. There are no such things as true. Those people are. They're potentially extremely dangerous. Okay, so some people deny you can't even apprehend them. But let me assume for the rest of the conversation that we can, if that's okay with you. Even if not. Letter B, yes. You're a moral nihilist? Good. Talk to me. Okay.
A moral nihilist, if they would believe that there is no good or evil.
Correct.
Wouldn't that create chaos? How could a society even function in that situation?
So that's right. How would culture, civilization even function in that situation if there is just no right or wrong? That is one of the responses to moral nihilism, is that if that's the case, that it'll hurt you. A moral nihilist might say, well, that's easy. There are no right and wrong. Fine. There's no right and wrong. They're just socially acceptable behavior to help the tribe survive. But it's not because there's objectively right and wrong at all. So if you want to drive on the right side of the road, okay, I'll agree to that, sure.
But for the tribe to survive, they would have to be a certain guideline.
If the tribe to survive a certain guideline for morals, they would say, no, not morals, just guidelines. And they would say they're purely subjective. And at any second I don't want to do it, I'll do what I want to. I'll talk about that later on. It's called psychological egoism. They would just probably be a psychological egoist. They would say, I'll just do what's best for me and my interest. And as long as it serves my interest to work alongside you in business, I'll do it. But I'll betray you the second I want to, because there's nothing wrong with that. It's a dog-eat-dog world. In reality, in the real world right now, many people act like moral nihilists. That's my little sermon for the day. No, that's the first sermon of the day. Okay. And I'll meet them. I go, see this. Yeah. Okay. No, good question. They would say, sure, you can have a society. There's no right and wrong about that. You just arbitrary rules. We decide to get along with each other so that I survive longer.
It would be literally a dog-eat-dog.
A dog-eat-dog world. That's right. That's right. That's right. You get my way. You harm me. You wrong me. You get my way what I want. There's nothing wrong with backstabbing you, betraying you, killing your family. Oh, yeah. Doesn't mean they would do it, but that might be what they believe. Yeah. So how do we apprehend morality? I will assume that we do, and I'll tell you, well, I think we do. Letter B, moral emotions. Sometimes we have things, I'll bring these up, moral emotions. These are emotions. Do I have them on the screen? Where am I doing? Yeah. These are emotions that arise in response to moral violations or virtuous actions. Either one. You've done something wrong, done something right. Either committed by oneself or observed in others. Either one. So these are moral violations, the feelings that come when a moral right or duty has been violated, or a virtuous action. Either you've done it or you've seen someone do it. So for example, guilt. That's a moral emotion. That's a very, very common one. It arises when one perceives oneself as having violated a moral norm. And that vocabulary is important. Perceives oneself to have violated. In my counseling profession or experience for 20 years, and this is why when you feel guilty, don't assume you are guilty. You can be guilty when you feel guilty, but you ask the question, what have I done wrong? And again, most people who suffer from low self-esteem almost always are very bad at convincing me they are guilty. They're very bad at convincing me that, because they're not. What they tell me is what they've done wrong. That's not wrong at all. But you can be wrong. You can be guilty. And when you do feel guilt, you should pay close attention to it and ask the question, what have I done wrong? And if you've done something wrong, you're guilty. But that's a moral emotion that comes after the fact. Trust that. So much so, if you never feel guilty, you might be a psychopath or a sociopath. That's a bad sign. If you never feel guilt, there's some off. It doesn't mean you're innocent. It just might mean your guilt radar is all broken. Just like mathematics is still true, even if you can't do it. So guilt is a moral emotion. Indignation, or we call that righteous anger, indignation, right? That arises when observing others commit a perceived moral violation. If I just watched Julie go up and slap Hayden for no reason, well, there's probably a reason, frankly. But let's say I think there's no reason. I'm going to get mad that she did that. I wasn't hurt. I have no sensation in my body that says she didn't violate my boundaries. But I'd get very angry. If I saw someone at Walmart do that to Julia, I would feel indignation. You violated the moral value of respecting her personal boundaries, her physical boundaries. That was unkind, unloving. That I'm going to feel indignation about that. When Jesus overturned the money changers' table, I think he probably, most scholars concur that he probably was feeling, it doesn't say this, he probably was feeling indignation. Now, that's not to say he all of a sudden lost his cool. Like, oh, I can't stand it. It might have been most scholars think it was probably very calculated. All that to say, he probably did feel indignation. Empathy, the ability to feel or understand another person's emotions, often leading to compassionate. That's an emotional. When someone does something right, or they're hurting, does something wrong, I feel empathy. If Julia got slapped and I watched it, I would feel empathy for Julia, right? That's what people do. Pride, and that's the positive feeling that arises from acting virtuously or fulfilling a moral obligation. Christians, humbly in my experience, have always gotten this wrong. They treat pride as an inherent sin. It is not an inherent sin. The kind of pride that's competitive is sinful. The kind of pride that leaves independence apart from God is sinful. And the emotion that we use in American English for pride does not always mean those things. It often refers to the sense of what I just described, and it's on the screen. A positive feeling that arises from acting virtuously. I'm proud of myself. I did a hard thing. I ran that marathon. I loved that man when he was not lovable. I shut my mouth when I could have let them have it. I'm proud of myself. God's proud of me. Oh, no, that's sorry. I just sinned. Sorry, God, I just sinned again. I'm so horrible. I know I ought not be prideful. And then they come see me on my couch. Okay, tell me again why you're such a horrible person. Because I was proud of myself when I did the right thing. That's not sinful at all. Good for you. You should. No, it's not. It's sin. Okay, let me ask you this question. Have you ever been proud of your children? All the time. Why have you sinned all your life? That's different. Why is it different? They deserve it. There we are. You don't, right? It's shame all over again. Yes, you can be proud in that sense. But if you're being proud by the sense of, I'm fiercely independent of God, that's destructive. You're going down the wrong path. If you think you're better than other people and arrogance is sin, and that pride is sinful. But I'm glad I did that. Way to go. That was hard work. I'm proud of my accomplishment. That's okay. Those are moral feelings of, So I like to think of guilt as when I've done something wrong. Pride is when I've done something right. If pride still makes you scared or you disagree, fine, change another word. Self-happiness. Or just don't use pride. Say, I have a positive feeling that arose because I acted virtuously. I call that pride, but okay. What do moral emotions do? What's their function? Well, they can act as internal regulators of behavior. For instance, you have anticipated guilt. Oh, I hate feeling guilty, so it deters me from doing something I don't want to do. Well, empathy can motivate helping behavior. That's true. Like I have a very, very low tolerance for the feeling of guilt. I wish I only avoided bad things just because I just want to always do the right thing. Sometimes that's true. Other times, like, I hate feeling guilty, so don't do it. Well, that's a moral feeling that's helped me make the right choice. Or empathy is, I'm going to already think about my wife is going to be really tired today, and when she was pregnant with Hayden and Julia, her feet would swell a lot because she was a teacher. She'd come home and they were as big as elephants, I felt badly, so I would maybe get pillows ready for the couch or give her 3 gallons of Diet Coke and a hot chocolate. I don't know, just trying to be kind of that empathy ahead of time, prop your feet up, or I've got dinner ready or something, trying to on my good days. Moral emotions help. Moral thoughts are different. Moral thoughts, of course, these refer to cognitive processes and judgments about what is right, wrong, fair, unfair, just, or unjust. Just what you think about it. For example, you have ethical reasoning. That's when you deliberate about the right course of action in a moral dilemma. I'm thinking about what's the right thing to do. Moral judgments. I'm evaluating actions as good, bad, permissible, obligatory, etc. And I can reflect on principles, thinking about underlying moral rules or principles that guide judgments and behavior. I'm just thinking about morality. Well, what's the benefit here? Well, they help structure and justify our actions and beliefs about morality. So it's typical when you sit around and think about it. Think about it. Conscious deliberation. It can be influenced by your kinfolk, your family, your culture, the town, your capacity to reason. All those things can influence. There's no doubt about that. And we need to be very conscientious of that and humble about it to say, I don't always think perfectly about morality. Yeah, I do. Do you think perfectly about mathematics all the time? Okay, put your hand down. Even Einstein wasn't that dude, he said. Anyway, the point is not everyone's perfectly about math, not perfect about morality either. Think about it. It seems to me, I like to use that a lot, it seems to me that the right choice is X, Y. It seems to me that's the moral thing to do. That's why being around other thoughtful Christian thinkers is helpful. What do you think? It seems to me that's the best thing to do. We're both assuming there's objectively moral right thing to do because we're both being realist. We're appealing to something outside of ourselves, but we're in together trying to figure out what that is. That's moral thinking. Emotions and thoughts can operate independently. I think they can operate independently. They can, but they typically go together. For example, let's say you have a strong emotional reaction like disgust. I watch the news sometimes. I'm disgusted at what I saw. People just disgusted. I saw videos of this one little kid apparently trying to get into a gang. He had the task of punching a random old person. So he goes over to the senior citizen who's walking, mind his business in New York, and he just goes, pop, knocks him out. Knocks out the guy cold. He collapses, 80-something years old. I mean, I'm just rage and disgust and empathy. So that goes together, but it might shape or reinforce my moral judgments, which are thoughts, which is, that's wrong. See, I feel so strongly about it. That tells me how right I am that my moral, that's not what it feels like. Or the opposite direction, with reflection and reasoning, when I'm on a cool day and I'm not watching the news and I'm thinking about it, you might suppress or modify an initial emotional reaction. For instance, after reflecting on principles of fairness and justice, that might override a visceral reaction of anger or resentment. So instead of thinking, okay, if I ever see a video of someone getting punched and I'm the judge, instead of going, chop his arms off and rip his legs off and he's horrible, wait a second, what's the just thing to do here? Instead of letting my gut reaction drive it. So feelings and thoughts go together, and we need to let those come together. Most of us need to think about thinking first before feeling, before we overreact, right? Maybe not you, other people. Okay. Those are moral thoughts. So what about moral intuition? Moral intuition is how we apprehend it. So intuition in general. Oh, let me pause. Any questions so far? No one's raised their hand. Just jump in there if you want to. It's a great question. So the person who punches the person, what's their moral reasoning? Is it be part of the clan? Their values must be very different from the rest of people. I would have to interview the person. Because I suspect, unless the person's a moral nihilist or they're a psychopath or sociopath, I suspect the person who punched that person, statistically speaking, did think it was wrong to do it. Morally, it was immoral to do it, and chose to do the bad thing because he had a higher moral value to him, which is fitting in to his pack and being seen as strong or part of the group. And I could tell by the way he did the video, he was chump. He just walked by, and as soon as he ran off. Well, he didn't act proud, like he was proud of his accomplishment. He acted like he was a skinny little chicken boy who had to, that's all. All that to say, I had to interview the person. That's why they interview serial killers and so forth. Say, help me understand, did you think it was wrong or right or whatever it might be? And oftentimes, depending on the person, they might go, I knew it was wrong, but I felt so compelled to do it. I felt a compulsive need to do it. Or I knew, and I was struggling with that. I knew I didn't want to kill those people over and over and over, but something said I had to do it. And so I know it was wrong to do it. They'll say, yeah, it was a moral vow. I thought about it, and I struggled, and I would go a long stretch without killing people. I mean, I've seen those studies and read them and seen the documentaries and read the books. And so just because they do heinous things does not mean they think it's immoral. It doesn't mean they think it's moral to do it. It means they override that sense of. And before that sounds too crazy to ask, you have to ask yourself, have you ever sinned and did it on purpose? If the answer is no, good. But for the rest of us, that's what anyone does when they sin and they know they shouldn't do it. We ask the person, do you not think that's right? Not you didn't do that. I'm saying if we fussed at them and said, do you not think that's right or wrong? Do you not realize it's wrong to gossip? Yes. Then why did you just do it? What's wrong with you? Well, that's what the rest of us do for people of sins we struggle with. We don't struggle with murdering people. Some do. You might struggle with gossip. But there's a struggle. But just because we do it doesn't mean I think it's a good thing. That's for sure. So that's a good question. We would have to talk to the person. Good comment, rather. So intuition, in general, is what? It's that immediate understanding or realization without the conscious use of reasoning. I just know and I know that I know. I just got that gut reaction. It's a way of knowing or sensing something without the use of explicit analytical processes. For example, you can have a sensory intuition of a table. I just know the table exists because I just know it. I feel it, and I just do. I don't have to sit there and calculate and think about it. I just feel it. There's a table. I can know for a fact that 2 + 2 = 4. I just know it. My intuition tells me it's just true. I don't need a laboratory. I don't need books and literature. I don't have to reflect. Let's think on that truth. I just go, yep, that's true. 2 + 2 = 4. That just makes sense. It just is. Intuitions are not infallible. They're not. You can be wrong. But they are prima facie justified. That means at face value. That is, don't think you're perfect with your intuitions. We don't trust all of our intuitions perfectly. But you are reasonable to trust them until someone demonstrates that you're mistaken. You have to have overriding counter arguments or evidence. David, I know you think that table there and you think you feel it, but there is no table. What do you mean? I feel it right now. There's no table. I have to prove it, bringing a bunch of people. There's no table. You're all lying. No, we're not. For example, if someone shows a paranoia, which is typically a side effect of schizophrenia, it's not always, but a paranoid schizophrenic, and you have to tell them you're not being chased by the FBI. There's nothing happening. Yes, I am. I know I am. But you're not. I've talked to paranoid schizophrenics. No, it's just as real to them. My gut feeling, I know I'm being listened to. Right now, they'll whisper when I've had the conversation. They're whispering, this happened. And then blah, blah. Why are you whispering? Because they can probably hear us. And so they're convinced of it. So your intuition can be mistaken, but you are prima facie at face value. You can trust that until someone has overriding guts. But humble people know that. Raise your hand if you're paranoid schizophrenic. Good. 2 people. Good. 2.5. You live with one. Good. See, we're in good company. I knew there's something wrong with Greta. Tim, all this time, knew it. You're the humblest. Now listen, you're the best humble person I've ever seen. Okay, that's just intuition in general. Moral intuition is like that. Moral intuition refers to the immediate, often automatic, non-reflective feelings or judgments about the rightness or wrongness of an action, situation, or behavior. About the rightness or wrongness of an action, situation, or behavior. These intuitions typically arise without conscious deliberation or explicit reasoning. They can, just like that gut feeling, that instinctual, just gut reaction. So if I often ask a person, if I said, Becky, what do you think about rape? And if she goes, it's wrong. And I'll go, Becky, did you think for a long time? No. Why not? It's just wrong. What, did you deliberate and did you write a journal and read some dissertations? No. I would suspect it's just wrong. We call that moral intuition. Something just tells me. You don't have to reason with me. Now, your intuition might be mistaken. It really is a good thing to rape. But until you have really, really good reasons to disbelieve that intuition, you have reason to trust it, just like you trust 2 + 2 = 4. So here are some key features of moral intuition, because I'm convinced since I'm a realist, I think moral values really are objective, abstract properties of the real. It's real. There's a moral law, you might say, out there. Moral intuition, I think, is how we apprehend it. So here are about 4 major features of moral intuition. And then we'll be done. First, it's immediate. It's fast. So unlike reflective moral reasoning, moral intuitions occur quickly. Now, you might see someone being mistreated and immediately feel that it's wrong without having to ponder or analyze the situation. So that's the first feature of moral intuition. It's usually gut reaction. 2, it's not always consciously accessible. That is, the reasons behind our moral intuitions might not always be apparent to us. I don't know why I think that's wrong. I don't know why I think that's right. While we might have a strong feeling that something is right or wrong, we might struggle to articulate precisely why we feel that way. When I taught at Houston Christian High School, in Houston, I had a 2-semester on ethics that I taught, and I would always do that. I would say, okay, is blah, blah, say if it's raping is wrong, I put on the board. And they would go, and there was a pause, or I'd make a joke. No, okay, for real, is it wrong? Okay, yes, it's wrong. Okay, why? And they would go, yes, it's wrong. And I go, why? And it would take a while. Because, and I would do whatever it is. It took a while to think about why it's wrong. What moral value or duty are they violating? And at some level, I won't tell you what it came to, but all I'm pointing is that's a good example, and it happened in every single classroom. It took a while to think out different options. Is so-and-so wrong? Or is this the right thing to do? Most people don't think about why they think it's right or wrong. Moral intuitions are that way. So you don't know. Listen, the point is, you don't have to know why you think it's wrong or right. For your gut to say, I know it's wrong. I know it's right. That's a moral intuition. I don't need to be able to articulate in a dissertation. That's still okay. It can be culturally influenced. They can be. Our moral intuitions can be shaped by our cultural upbringing. That is, the values and norms we've been taught. It sure can be. For example, in the South, where we're ingrained to show honor all the time, we have a stronger, I think this is true, we have a stronger impulse and moral intuition to notice dishonorable or disrespect. We are just gut level fast about it. And we can tell by various things we've been taught of expressions. You're supposed to say, like I said, sir or ma'am, and please and thank you, and titles. And if you don't, it's just very fast. Where maybe in other parts, say in New York or something, they may not be as quick to judge that as a wrong behavior. They also don't, a New Yorker thinks being dishonorable is also bad, but they may not be as quick to point that out or feel that moral intuition because the culture has not really put that in them over and over. Don't forget, don't be. But anyway, your culture can shape it. And of course, it can conflict with moral reasoning. It can. There are times when our intuitive moral reactions might conflict with our more considered, reasoned conclusions. For example, one might have an initial negative reaction to a morally controversial topic based on intuition, but upon reflection and deliberation, come to a different conclusion. And I gave an example there in the movie Imitation Game, which is based on a true story, of course, which is just fantastic. They broke the German encryption device called Enigma, and that changed the whole course of the war. But when that happened, if you've ever seen the movie, they break the code, and as soon as they break it, and they get the data and they see on those board where all the German warships are, and they're very excited because they realize, well, now we can go tell the Allies that's where all the submarines are, so that the warships and submarines and stuff, they can avoid it, and they're super excited. And then all of a sudden, the main character says, no, he grabs the phone, you can't do that, He said, what are you talking about? He said, one guy, we got to go tell him my brother is right there. He's on that ship. The submarine's going to get him. He said, no, we can't do that, because if that's the case, the Germans will notice that it's just too perfect. They avoided all of us, which means they must have broken the Enigma machine. Then they'll change it, and all of our work was worthless. So there's an initial gut reaction of, basically, praise God, we can do it. So the right thing to do is save my brother and save those people on the ships. That's the right thing to do. Save lives, right thing to do. And that is a good thing. That is the right thing. But upon further reflection, you start seeing the bigger picture, and that is you might save their lives, then that's good. And the consequentialists would say, but you're going to lose more lives in the long haul when they change Enigma all over, and this is worthless. And they'll do it immediately. They'll say it's been broken, we change the whole coding system. So we would save 1,000 lives, or we can save, and they calculated it might have saved millions of lives, the Enigma machine, because they deliberately calculated when to use the Enigma for their benefit or against them, which means the American, or the British military, they allowed people to die. And that's a different point, but it's a really good point for sermons and for books. That's exactly what God does. That's exactly what he does. He deliberately he knows the picture and the final goal so well, perfectly, and he knows exactly the code of everything. He will deliberately use certain people's demise for the greater good. We do it as humans all the time. We go, yeah, I understand when God does it, he's a moral monster. How dare he? When we do it, go, well, we're right. That seems unfair to me. Okay. What question? I'm going to stop there. What question or comments do you have about that? That's a good point. So on the rape example, empathy kicks in. You say, well, the reason why it's wrong is because that could be me. That is a perfectly stated sentiment from a subjectivist, from a relativist. That the reason why it's wrong is because I don't like it, and I wouldn't like it done to me. That's exactly what a subjectivist would say. They would say, amen, sister. They wouldn't say amen, but they might. That's right. A moral realist would say that's not why it's wrong. A moral realist would say the reason why you feel empathy is because you know it is wrong. You know it is wrong for someone to forcefully have sex against them. You are violating their personal boundaries. It's against their will. Right. So the question is, it'd still be empathy, knowing it causes you pain. The question is, you said that's why they think it's wrong. That is, what's the grounds for why I think it's wrong? That's back to the earlier questions of, why do I think something's wrong? My moral intuition, I feel empathy. Is that why I think it's wrong? That's back to the earlier comments about an objectivist or subjectivist or realist or relativist. So they would say that's like saying, to what does the moral value refer? A subjectivist is going to say, your empathy is why you think it's wrong, because you're putting yourself in their shoes. You think it's wrong because it affects you and you think there's pain. An objectivist or realist would say that's not why you think it's wrong. You think it's wrong because it is wrong. It's just wrong. It's wrong to rape. It's an objective truth. And I feel empathy for the person, which is the right thing to feel, but that's not why I think it's wrong.
But you would have to be taught that it's wrong.
You'd have to be taught that it's wrong.
If you didn't have empathy.
If you didn't have empathy, you had to be taught it's wrong. Okay, and therefore what? If you didn't have empathy and someone had to teach you rape is wrong, therefore what?
Well, you might accept it if you're not taught it.
Good. You might accept it if it's not taught it's wrong, therefore what? Okay, no, this is perfect. This is great. So a subjectivist would say what you just said and say, they would say, therefore it's not wrong. It's just what you've been taught. An objectivist would say is, just because you've been taught it has nothing to do whether or not it's wrong or right. Of course you were taught it. Who cares? You were taught 2 + 2 = 4. Is that relative? Is 4 just whatever you want to feel? Or is it 4? You want to go with empathy. Good. We'll see. Good. So a subjectivist would say empathy is a good thing. And a realist would say empathy is a good thing. Yeah, we agree on that. We're disagree, but those two camps disagree on why we think it's wrong. A subjectivist says, I think it's wrong just because it's my personal preferences and feelings. And I feel empathy, therefore I don't want to be hurt like that, so don't hurt me, therefore don't hurt her. It's just a purely subjective. That's why I think it's wrong. An objectivist says, I think it's wrong because it is wrong. I'm appealing to something outside of my feelings. Even if I didn't feel empathy and I didn't feel disgust, rape, it would still be wrong. And you say, well, they were taught that. Or objective would say, well, so what? I'm taught 2 + 2 = 4. Is it important as long as you agree that it's wrong? Well, that's one argument. You both say it's wrong. Who cares? We're out of time. In that instance, stopping a rape, I would say is a good thing no matter what. Whatever your reasons were, right? I think it can be problematic if you disagree on these issues. It can be very problematic of deciding what is right and wrong. But to the rape victim, they're not going to say, wait, let's get our ethics in order. Can you stop the rape? We both agree we should stop the rape, but the reasons why we did it are very different. I want to stop the rape because it's wrong to rape. You might say, I want to stop the rape because that would hurt me if someone did it to me.
But yeah, I also have empathy, but I also know it's wrong.
If you know it's wrong, then you're not a subjectivist. I have empathy too. You cannot be both. You're either a subjectivist or you're an objectivist. You can't be both. As an objectivist, I think it's wrong. I know it's wrong. My moral intuition tells me it's wrong. And I feel empathy for the victim. And I feel disgust that it happened. And I feel indignation about the person who did it toward the person. I feel those things, but that's not why I think it's wrong. We're out of time. I want to say a quick prayer. Sorry, Red. Quick prayer, and then I'll be around for a little bit. We thank you, Jesus, so much for the opportunity to think about such things. Help us be moral people. Holy Spirit, we love you. We ask for your grace and for your humility as we treat these issues as a community.